The transfer order arrived without warning, buried beneath a stack of routine paperwork on a gray afternoon. Daniel Graves had spent more than 2 decades working in some of the most dangerous correctional facilities in the country, and he believed there was very little left that could surprise him. He had witnessed riots, hostage situations, and inmates capable of unspeakable cruelty. His reputation as a disciplined and unshakable warden had earned him respect among officers and fear among prisoners. Yet the document waiting on his desk carried a sense of importance unlike anything he had encountered before. There was no official facility name attached to the assignment. No address. No explanation regarding the inmates he would oversee. Instead, the file contained page after page of legal agreements, confidentiality clauses, and warnings about consequences for discussing the position with anyone. The compensation offered was staggering, more money than he could have earned in the remainder of his career. Most people would have celebrated such an opportunity, but something about the offer felt wrong. It was as if they were paying not for his expertise, but for his silence. Over the following days, Daniel attempted to gather information through every contact he possessed. Government databases returned nothing. Former colleagues had never heard of the institution. Even high-ranking officials who normally answered his calls became strangely evasive whenever he mentioned the transfer. Some abruptly ended conversations. Others claimed they knew nothing despite obvious discomfort in their voices. A week later, he was summoned to a secure government building where a panel of expressionless officials waited behind a long steel table. They informed him that he had been selected because of his exceptional service record and psychological resilience. When he asked what kind of inmates required such secrecy, the room fell silent. One official eventually slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were photographs. The images were grainy and distorted, but what they depicted made no sense. Figures stood behind reinforced barriers, their shapes twisted and unnatural. Some appeared too tall. Others seemed blurred, as though the camera itself struggled to focus on them. One image showed a pair of glowing eyes staring directly into the lens from complete darkness. Daniel looked up, expecting an explanation. Instead, the official nearest to him simply said that the prisoners under his supervision were not to be approached alone, spoken to unnecessarily, or trusted under any circumstances. Their welfare was irrelevant. Containment was the only priority. The moment those words left the man's mouth, Daniel realized this assignment was unlike any prison duty he had ever accepted. The journey to the facility began before dawn. Daniel Graves was instructed to bring only a small bag containing personal essentials. Everything else, he was told, would be provided upon arrival. The lack of information continued to gnaw at him, but by that point curiosity had become stronger than caution. A black transport vehicle waited outside his residence, its windows heavily tinted and its occupants impossible to identify. Without a word, the driver opened the door and motioned for him to get inside. For hours, the vehicle traveled through isolated roads that seemed to lead nowhere. Daniel attempted to track their route, but eventually lost all sense of direction. The landscape outside gradually changed. Familiar towns disappeared. Forests became sparse and lifeless. Even the sky appeared different, dimmer somehow, as though the sun struggled to penetrate an invisible veil hanging over the world. As evening approached, a dense black fog rolled across the road. It swallowed the surrounding terrain within minutes. The driver did not slow down. The headlights barely illuminated a few feet ahead, yet the vehicle continued forward with unsettling confidence. Daniel noticed something strange then. The clock on the dashboard began behaving erratically. Its numbers flickered between different times before freezing altogether. A growing sense of unease settled in his chest. The fog thickened until it completely surrounded them. Outside the windows there was nothing but darkness. No landmarks. No sounds. No indication that the world beyond still existed. Then, without warning, the pressure inside the vehicle shifted. Daniel felt a sharp pain in his ears, similar to the sensation experienced during rapid changes in altitude. Moments later, the fog suddenly parted. What emerged beyond it was impossible. A colossal fortress stretched across a barren landscape beneath a crimson sky. Jagged towers pierced swirling clouds that glowed with an unnatural red light. Massive walls of black stone surrounded the structure, their surfaces covered in symbols Daniel did not recognize. The place looked ancient, older than any prison ever constructed by human hands. As he stepped from the vehicle, he turned to look behind him. The road was gone. The fog remained where it had been, but there was no sign of the path they had traveled. No mountains. No forests. No evidence of Earth itself. A deep metallic groan echoed through the air as enormous gates opened before him. The transport driver remained inside the vehicle, refusing to meet his gaze. Daniel took several steps toward the entrance, and the gates slowly closed behind him. When he spun around, the vehicle had vanished, leaving him completely alone beneath the blood-red sky. The first few days inside the prison were spent learning procedures, memorizing security protocols, and familiarizing himself with the labyrinth of corridors that stretched beneath the fortress. The guards rarely spoke unless necessary, and whenever they did, their words were short and carefully chosen. Many appeared exhausted despite having only recently begun their shifts. Some looked genuinely terrified. Daniel noticed that no one lingered near the inmates' cell blocks longer than required. At first, the prisoners remained hidden behind reinforced doors constructed from a dark metal unlike anything Daniel had seen before. Their records were inaccessible, their crimes classified. Every request for information was denied. The administration's instructions were simple: maintain containment and avoid unnecessary interaction. That order became difficult to follow. Late one evening, Daniel conducted a routine inspection through one of the lower cell corridors. The area was silent except for the distant hum of electrical systems buried within the walls. As he passed a sealed chamber, a voice emerged from the darkness beyond the viewing slit. Daniel Graves. He froze. The voice had spoken his full name. No inmate should have known who he was. The personnel files were restricted, and he had arrived only days earlier. Assuming it was some kind of trick, he continued walking. A second voice immediately called out from another cell farther down the corridor. Still carrying the guilt, aren't you? Daniel stopped again. His heartbeat quickened. The statement struck a nerve because it referred to something deeply personal, a fatal prison riot years earlier that had resulted in the deaths of several officers under his command. Few people knew how much responsibility he secretly carried for that tragedy. Before he could react, more voices began emerging from neighboring cells. Some whispered. Others laughed. Several called him by childhood nicknames he had not heard in decades. One inmate described the exact layout of the house where he had grown up. Another mentioned conversations he had shared only with his late father. Each detail was impossible for strangers to know. The deeper Daniel ventured into the cell block, the worse it became. The prisoners spoke about forgotten memories, hidden fears, and regrets he had never revealed to anyone. Their voices varied in age and tone, yet they all possessed the same unsettling certainty. Then he reached a cell unlike the others. Behind its narrow viewing window stood a tall figure shrouded in darkness. The creature slowly stepped forward until its pale eyes became visible. A smile spread across its face. "We've been waiting for you," it said softly. "Much longer than you realize." Daniel stared through the glass, unable to speak. The figure's smile widened. "You think this is your first time here?" The weeks that followed were filled with growing unease. Strange incidents began occurring throughout the prison with alarming frequency. Guards vanished during routine patrols without triggering alarms. Surveillance footage would cut to static moments before the disappearances, leaving behind only corrupted recordings filled with distorted sounds and impossible shapes. Official reports blamed equipment failures or human error, but Daniel no longer believed those explanations. Something was happening beneath the surface of the facility, and the administration seemed determined to hide it. Driven by suspicion, he started conducting his own investigation. Accessing restricted archives required bypassing security measures that could have ended his career, yet he felt he had no choice. The answers he uncovered only deepened the nightmare. Hidden records revealed that the prison had existed for centuries, long before modern governments had taken control of it. The fortress had changed hands countless times throughout history. Empires had risen and fallen around it. Entire civilizations had documented its existence under different names, often describing it not as a prison, but as a seal. The word appeared repeatedly. Seal. Not containment facility. Not correctional institution. A seal. Daniel dug further and discovered references to catastrophic events that had occurred whenever sections of the prison were damaged. Entire guard contingents had disappeared. Regions surrounding the fortress had reportedly suffered unexplained disasters. Each incident had been linked to breaches within the deepest levels of the structure. According to the oldest records, the creatures housed inside the cells were never the true reason for the prison's existence. They were prisoners, yes. But they were also wardens. Captives forced to remain near something far worse. Determined to learn the truth, Daniel ventured into forgotten tunnels beneath the lowest cell blocks. The air grew colder with every step. Ancient symbols covered the walls, pulsing faintly as though alive. The architecture became older and less human the deeper he descended. Eventually, he reached a colossal chamber hidden far below the prison. What he found there shattered every assumption he had made. At the center of the cavern stood an enormous abyss descending into endless darkness. Massive chains stretched across the void, each one thicker than a train. Strange structures surrounded the pit, covered in markings that radiated a faint crimson glow. As Daniel approached the edge, he heard a sound rising from below. Breathing. Slow. Heavy. Ancient. The vibration shook the stone beneath his feet. Then countless eyes opened in the darkness. For a brief moment, he glimpsed something impossibly vast moving beneath the abyss, a shape so enormous that his mind struggled to comprehend it. Every monster confined within the prison suddenly made sense. They had never been the greatest threat. They had been the locks keeping something else trapped. The discovery beneath the prison marked the beginning of the end. After witnessing the unimaginable entity chained within the abyss, Daniel Graves understood why the fortress existed and why generations of wardens had vanished trying to protect its secret. The prison was failing. Cracks had begun appearing throughout the structure, not just in its walls but in the ancient forces that held the creature captive. Every disappearance, every system malfunction, and every strange event had been a symptom of a much larger collapse. Over the following days, chaos spread through the facility. Security barriers failed without warning. Cell doors opened and closed on their own. The crimson sky above the prison darkened as massive storms formed across the horizon. Guards who had served there for years abandoned their posts in panic, while others simply disappeared into the shadows never to be seen again. The inmates sensed the change immediately. Their behavior shifted from hostility to fear. For the first time, they were afraid. Daniel eventually uncovered the final piece of the truth hidden within records left behind by previous wardens. The chains beneath the abyss were powered by a living anchor. Every generation, one individual had been chosen to bind themselves to the prison and maintain the seal. The role was not symbolic. The chosen warden became part of the mechanism itself, sacrificing their freedom, identity, and eventually their humanity to keep the entity imprisoned. The previous anchor had died. That was why the prison had summoned Daniel. Not to manage inmates. Not to enforce rules. To replace the one who had fallen. As the ancient creature continued to awaken, reality itself began unraveling around the fortress. Portions of the prison collapsed into endless voids. Entire corridors twisted into impossible shapes. Through fractures in the walls, Daniel could see glimpses of earth far beyond the realm. Cities. Highways. Homes. The barrier separating worlds was weakening. The entity wanted only one thing. Escape. If it crossed into the human world, the destruction would be beyond comprehension. Standing above the abyss one final time, Daniel faced an impossible choice. A gateway had opened nearby, offering him a chance to return home. He could finally escape the nightmare and leave the prison behind. Yet doing so would guarantee the collapse of the seal. Below him, the darkness stirred. The chains strained. The creature's countless eyes focused upon him. Daniel looked toward the distant gateway and then back into the abyss. For several moments he stood motionless. Then he stepped away from freedom and approached the ancient mechanism, fully aware that once the ritual began, he would never leave the prison again.